The boy with a gift. Introduction of protagonist, Kofi. In the heart of a small village nestled between rolling hills and wide, flowing rivers, lived a 12-year-old boy named Kofi. Though he was just a child, Kofi was known far and wide for his extraordinary abilities. He was no ordinary boy. From the moment he could walk and speak, he had demonstrated remarkable gifts that amazed everyone who met him. Whether it was healing the sick, calming the troubled, or speaking words that seemed to come from a place beyond his years, Kofi's presence had an almost magical quality. His mother, Abina, often called him her blessing from the heavens. She was a kind and loving woman who had always believed that Kofi's gifts were a divine blessing meant to help those around him. His father, Kwaku, was a humble farmer who worked hard to provide for their family. Though he didn't fully understand Kofi's miraculous abilities, he supported his son with love and encouragement. Kofi's life was humble. His family lived in a small, thatched roof house at the edge of the village. Despite their modest means, Kofi's parents always made sure their home was filled with warmth, laughter, and love. The villagers often marveled at how Kofi could bring so much light to their lives, especially given that his family had so little to offer. Kofi's early years. Kofi's gifts had manifested when he was very young, much earlier than anyone could have expected. As a toddler, he was often found playing with the older children in the village, doing things that left the adults in awe. One day, when Kofi was just 3 years old, his best friend, Kwame, came running to him, crying because he had scraped his knee on a rock. The wound was deep, and the blood flowed freely, but Kofi, with his tiny hands, knelt down and placed his palm over the cut. Within moments, the bleeding stopped, and the wound closed as if it had never been there. The elders who had gathered around gasped in disbelief, but young Kofi just smiled as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As he grew, his talents only became more apparent. When Kofi was 6 years old, he helped his mother in the fields by combing a herd of wild goats that had wandered into their crops. His gentle touch and soft words seemed to resonate with the animals, as they calmed instantly and followed him back to their pen. The villagers who witnessed this began to whisper amongst themselves, calling him the boy who speaks with the spirits, or the healer. Though Kofi was often praised for his miraculous abilities, he never saw himself as special. He had always been taught by his parents to stay humble and serve others. He would often spend his days helping the elderly, tending to the sick, and comforting those in pain. His village, though small, had become a place where people from nearby regions came seeking his help. People traveled great distances, hoping for a miracle, and Kofi never turned anyone away. But it was clear that his life was different from that of other children. He didn't run and play like the other boys. He didn't spend his time with toys or games. Instead, he spent hours praying, reading sacred texts, and practicing his gifts. He was often alone, contemplating the weight of his talents, and wondering what his purpose might be. He longed to understand the source of his gifts, but the answers never seemed to come. The prophecy. One cool evening, after a long day of helping villagers, Kofi found himself sitting at the edge of the village square, gazing up at the stars. The sky was clear, and the night air was crisp. He had just helped a woman who had been unable to walk for many years. Kofi had prayed over her, and miraculously, she had risen to her feet, her body healed. As he sat in contemplation, the village elder, Mama Abie, approached him. Mama Abie was a wise and respected figure in the village. She was an elderly woman with deeply lined skin and a knowing look in her eyes. Her reputation for seeing beyond the ordinary was well known, and she had always believed that Kofi was destined for something greater than what the village could offer. Kofi, Mama Abie said, her voice low and steady, I have been watching you for many years now. You possess gifts that are beyond this world. You have healed the sick, comforted the broken, and spoken words of wisdom far beyond your age. Kofi turned to her, his eyes filled with curiosity. "What do you mean, Mama Ebie?" Mama Ebie placed her hands gently on his shoulders and looked deeply into his eyes. "You are a child of great purpose, Kofi. There is a challenge awaiting you, one that will test not just your abilities but your very soul. The gods have chosen you for a reason, and it is not just to heal the sick or comfort the sorrowful. You are called to face something greater, something that will challenge your faith and your connection to the divine." Kofi listened intently, feeling a sense of both wonder and apprehension. "What do you mean? What must I do?" The elder smiled faintly. "You will know when the time comes. Trust in the spirits, Kofi. Trust in your gifts. And most of all, trust in yourself." With that, Mama Ebie stood and slowly walked away, leaving Kofi alone with his thoughts. Her words echoed in his mind, "You are destined for something greater." That night, as Kofi lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The prophecy weighed heavily on him. What could it mean? And why had Mama Ebie chosen to speak of it now? Was something about to change in the village, or was the challenge something far beyond the simple life he knew? Kofi closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, asking for guidance, but he knew deep down that the answers would come in time. For now, he would continue to serve and help those around him, trusting that whatever was coming, he would be ready. Little did he know, the challenge that awaited him was far more than he could ever have imagined, the River Goddess challenge. The arrival of the River Goddess. It had been weeks since the rains had last fallen in the village. The once crystal-clear river that ran beside the village, providing fresh water for drinking, bathing, and watering crops, had begun to dry up. At first, it was a small trickle, but soon the riverbed was barely more than cracked earth. The villagers watched in despair as their crops withered in the heat, the earth beneath their feet growing harder with each passing day. The elders gathered in the village square, their faces etched with concern. They had seen many seasons in their lifetimes, but nothing like this. The village had always been blessed by the river, its waters feeding the land and sustaining the people. And now, without it, life was crumbling. "We must seek the goddess of the river," said Elder Nia, an old and wise woman known for her knowledge of the ancient spirits that lived in the land. "It is said that she controls the flow of the waters. Perhaps she is angry, and we must appease her." The villagers murmured in agreement. They had heard of the river goddess in legends, an ancient deity known to bring both blessings and curses. She was a spirit of great power, able to control the rivers and lakes, ensuring their fertility, or destroying them if she was displeased. Many feared her, but in times of need, the village had always looked to her for help. Elder Nia led a small group of respected village leaders deep into the forest, where the river goddess was said to reside. The air grew thick and heavy as they entered the sacred clearing by the river, and a strange chill filled the space. The water, now murky and still, shimmered under the pale moonlight. Then, from the depths of the water, the goddess emerged. She was a figure both beautiful and terrifying. Her skin glistened with the pale blue of the river's depths, her long hair flowing like waves across her back. Her eyes were the color of the deepest pools, dark and endless. As she rose from the river, the earth around her trembled slightly, and the very air seemed to pulse with the power she commanded. "I have come, mortals." Her voice was a low, echoing sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "What do you seek from me?" Elder Nia stepped forward, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Great goddess, we are but humble people. The river has run dry, and our crops are dying. We ask for your help. Please, restore the waters to us, that we may live." The goddess looked down upon the group, her eyes narrowing. "You seek my power. You wish to bargain with me. Very well, I shall restore the river. But there is a price. Everything has a price." The villagers exchanged nervous glances. They knew that the river goddess was not one to be bargained with lightly. Elder Nia spoke again, her voice more hesitant this time. "What is the price, great one?" The goddess smiled, but it was a cold and unsettling smile. "I will restore the river and ensure that your crops flourish again. But in return, you must give me what I desire." The elders looked at each other in confusion, unsure of what the goddess meant. "And what is it that you desire?" Elder Nia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The goddess's gaze shifted toward the village, her expression unreadable. "I want the boy," she said softly. "The one they call Kofi. He is the one with the gifts. I will take him as my own. His life force will become mine, ensuring my continued power over the river. In return, I will restore the river and bring prosperity to your land." The elders were struck silent. Kofi, the boy who had healed the sick, performed miracles, and spoken with wisdom beyond his years. They had heard whispers that he was destined for greatness, but this was too much to ask. Elder Nia was the first to speak, though her voice was filled with unease. "But Kofi is a child of God. He is not to be given to anyone, not even to a goddess." The river goddess's expression darkened. "You have no choice. Without me, your village will perish. Your people will suffer. I hold the power, and if you do not comply, the river will remain dry, and your crops will die. The boy is the key to your survival. Will you bring him to me, or will you let your people drown in their desperation?" The elders looked at each other, fear creeping into their hearts. This was not a simple request. The life of the village, the very future of their people, rested on this decision. The goddess's power was immense, and it seemed that there was no way around her demand. The deal. Kofi's parents, Kwako and Abina, were summoned to the meeting. As the elders explained the goddess's terms, their hearts sank. They had always known that Kofi was special, but the idea of giving him up to the goddess was unthinkable. "Do you hear what she asks?" Kwako asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We cannot give up our son. He is a gift from God, and we cannot allow anyone to take him from us." Abina wept, clutching Kofi tightly to her chest. "But if we don't, the village will starve. The crops will die, and our people will perish." Kofi, who had been standing quietly, watching his parents' distress, finally spoke. His voice was steady and calm, surprising everyone in the room. "I will not go. I cannot give myself to her. My gifts come from a higher source, and I believe in that power. I cannot bow to her or anyone else." His words were filled with conviction, and for a moment, there was silence. The elders looked at him in awe, recognizing the strength in his voice. But the goddess's terms still hung heavily in the air. The village's fate was at stake. Kwaku looked at his son, his heart torn between his love for him and the weight of the village's suffering. "Kofi, you are our child. You are a gift, but you also have a purpose. If it is your fate to fulfill the goddess's demand, we will follow you. We will stand with you." Kofi shook his head firmly. "I know my purpose. It is not to serve the goddess of the river, but to serve the higher power that gives life and sustains the world. I will not be a pawn in her game." Kofi's decision. That night, as the village fell into a tense silence, Kofi knelt by his bed and prayed. He called upon the name of God, asking for strength and guidance. His heart was heavy, knowing the consequences of his decision. But in his soul, he knew that this was the right choice. He stood by his faith, believing that no earthly force could control him. The goddess may have power over the waters, but his gifts were not hers to claim. Kofi made a vow that he would never give up his life or his gifts to anyone except the true Creator. The next morning, when the elders came to speak with him, Kofi looked them in the eye and said, "I will not be given to her. I will stand and face whatever challenge she sends. But I will not bow to her power. His resolve was unshakable. The villagers, seeing Kofi's determination, found a renewed sense of hope. They knew that the challenge ahead would be difficult, but they believed in Kofi. And with that belief, they would stand beside him, no matter the cost. Kofi's decision had set the stage for a battle far greater than anyone could have imagined. A battle not just for the survival of the village, but for the very soul of Kofi himself. And in the days to come, he would need every ounce of faith and strength to face the river goddess and the trials that awaited him. Kofi's revelation. Kofi's struggles. As the days passed after his defiance of the river goddess, Kofi found himself haunted by strange dreams. At night, when he closed his eyes to sleep, visions of water, deep, dark, and endless, swirled in his mind. He saw the river goddess, her form shifting like the current, calling out his name. Her voice echoed in his dreams, a melody both enticing and threatening. But it wasn't just the goddess who appeared in his sleep. There were other beings, figures with translucent skin that shimmered like water, with eyes full of ancient wisdom. They spoke to him in a language he didn't understand, but somehow, he knew what they were saying. They called him the bridge, the one who could unite the elements of earth and water, the one who had the power to restore balance to the world. Kofi awoke from these dreams drenched in sweat, his heart racing. He didn't understand what it all meant. Was it a sign from the goddess, trying to claim him? Or was it something else entirely, something divine, something greater than even the goddess's power? His mind was clouded with confusion. He had always believed that his gift came from a higher source, from the Creator who ruled over the heavens and the earth. But now, the dreams made him question everything. The river goddess's power seemed all-encompassing, and in his dreams, he saw herself as a force of nature, both beautiful and terrifying. Why am I seeing these things? He would often ask himself, staring at the ceiling as the wind rustled through the thatched roof of his small house. Am I being led to the river by the goddess, or am I being called to something greater? Kofi began to distance himself from the others, spending more time alone, praying and seeking answers. He couldn't shake the feeling that his destiny was about to change, but he was unsure of how to move forward. The dreams plagued him, leaving him anxious and restless. He was afraid, but there was also a sense of urgency. Something was coming, something that he needed to prepare for. The divine encounter. One evening, after a particularly unsettling dream, Kofi sought solace in the village's small church. It was a humble structure, made of stone with wooden beams that creaked when the wind passed through. The air inside was cool, filled with the scent of incense and the soft glow of candlelight. Kofi knelt in front of the altar, his hands clasped together in prayer. God, he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. I don't understand what is happening. What do you want from me? I know I am meant for something, but I don't know what it is. Please show me the way. As he prayed, the room around him seemed to shift. The light from the candles flickered, casting long shadows on the stone walls. Suddenly, a bright light filled the church, so intense that Kofi had to shield his eyes. When the light dimmed, a figure appeared before him, standing tall and radiant. The figure was cloaked in a robe of light, and its face was hidden in a glow so bright that Kofi could not make out any features. The presence was overwhelming, filled with an aura of peace and power. Kofi, the voice spoke, deep and resonant, yet gentle. You have been chosen. You are not just a boy, but a messenger. A bridge between the earth and the water, between the world of man and the world of spirits. Kofi fell to his knees, unable to speak. The power of the figure overwhelmed him, but there was also a sense of calm, as if everything was as it should be. You are meant to restore balance, the voice continued. The river goddess is a force of nature, but she has forgotten her purpose. She has become consumed by power and greed. You must confront her, not with violence, but with faith, with the knowledge that you are a servant of the true Creator, the one who governs all things. Your gifts come from Him, and it is through Him that you will succeed. Kofi's heart raced. But how, he asked, his voice barely a whisper. How can I defeat her? She is so powerful. I'm just a boy. The figure remained silent for a moment, as if considering his words. Then it spoke again, its voice filled with kindness. You are more than a boy, Kofi. You are the embodiment of the Creator's will. You were given this gift not to serve others, but to bring balance to the world. Trust in your power, and trust in Him. The time to act is now. With that, the figure began to fade, the light growing dimmer until it disappeared entirely. Kofi sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. He knew he had received a message, a divine revelation, but the weight of it left him speechless. The uncertainty that had clouded his mind was replaced by a new understanding. He had been chosen for a purpose greater than he could have imagined. Kofi's awakening. The next morning, as the sun rose over the village, Kofi stood by the river, staring at the dry riverbed. The village was still suffering, the crops were withering, and the people were desperate. But now, Kofi understood what he had to do. He was not just a healer, not just a boy with strange gifts. He was the bridge, the one chosen to restore balance between the earth and the water. His gifts were not just for healing, they were the tools he would use to confront the river goddess and free his people from her grip. Kofi turned to his parents, who were sitting in the doorway of their house, watching him with worried eyes. I have received a message, he said, his voice filled with certainty. I know what I must do. Abina looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. Kofi, please, this is too much. The goddess is powerful. She will not let you stand in her way. But Kofi was resolute. I will not bow to her, Mama. I will not let her control me. I know my gifts come from a higher power, and it is that power that will guide me. Kwaku, though fearful, nodded slowly. We will stand by you, Kofi. Whatever happens, we are with you. With his parents' blessing, Kofi set out to confront the goddess. He knew that the battle ahead would not be easy, and that there would be many trials along the way. But he also knew that he was not alone. He had the strength of his faith, the power of his gifts, and the belief that he was meant to fulfill this purpose. As Kofi walked toward the river, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The weight of his destiny no longer felt like a burden, it felt like a calling, a mission he was meant to complete. He was no longer just a boy with gifts, he was the messenger, the bridge between the earth and the water, and he would face the goddess with nothing but his faith and the belief that the Creator would guide him. The challenge had only just begun, but Kofi was ready, the battle of light and darkness. The confrontation. The evening air was thick with tension as Kofi made his way to the sacred river. The sky was painted in hues of gold and crimson, the sun setting behind the hills, casting long shadows over the dry riverbed. It had been a long journey, both physical and spiritual, and Kofi's heart pounded in his chest with anticipation. He knew this moment would come, he could feel it in his very soul, but now that it was here, the weight of what lay ahead was almost overwhelming. As Kofi approached the water's edge, he could sense a shift in the atmosphere. The air grew colder, and a low hum vibrated through the ground beneath his feet. The river, once dry and barren, now swirled with dark, murky waters, a sickly, unnatural current that seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. And then, she appeared. From the depths of the river, the goddess rose, her form towering above Kofi. Her body was a terrifying and beautiful vision, a twisted fusion of woman and serpent, her skin glistening like the water surface, her eyes burning with a dark, almost predatory light. She gazed down at Kofi with a smirk of disdain, her voice like the crash of waves upon jagged rocks. You came, boy, she said, her voice rich with power and malice. I knew you would. And now, You stand before me, expecting to challenge me. Do you truly believe you can defeat me, the goddess of the river? I gave you life. I gave you your gift. And now, I will take them back. Kofi stood firm, his heart racing but his mind clear. He had known this moment would come, and he had prepared himself. The river goddess might have power over the waters, but his power came from something far greater. I am not yours to command, Kofi said, his voice steady. I belong to the Creator, the one who made the heavens and the earth. You may control the river, but only God holds the true power. I will not bow to you. The goddess's smile faded, replaced by a cold, menacing glare. Her form shimmered like liquid, her eyes narrowing as she raised her arms. Very well, child, she hissed. If you will not bow to me, then you will drown. You will regret defying me. The river will be your grave. The struggle. With a swift motion, the river goddess summoned the full force of the water. The river surged violently, the waves rising like towering walls, swirling and crashing as if they were alive. The water twisted and churned, roaring like a wild beast. In an instant, the river seemed to leap from its bed, rushing toward Kofi with a terrifying force. Kofi's heart pounded in his chest as the waters surged around him, but he did not move. He stood his ground, his feet planted firmly in the earth. The water rose higher, crashing toward him like an unstoppable tide. The river goddess laughed, her voice echoing through the storm of water. You are foolish, boy, she sneered. You cannot fight the power of the river. It is beyond you. Kofi's chest tightened, but he knew he could not allow fear to overtake him. His faith, his connection to the true Creator, was the only thing that could save him now. As the water rushed toward him, he closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. God, give me strength, he said softly, his voice trembling with the weight of the moment. I trust in you. Protect me from this evil. I stand in your name, and I will not be afraid. As he spoke, the water surged, crashing against his body, but he did not falter. His mind was focused, his heart steadfast in his belief. He raised his hands to the sky, calling upon the Creator to protect him from the goddess's wrath. The river goddess's laughter faded as the waters began to slow, their once furious force weakening. The goddess's face twisted in frustration. You dare to call upon the Creator, she shouted, her voice laced with fury. You are nothing but a child. You cannot defeat me. But Kofi remained unmoved. His prayer grew stronger, his voice rising with the intensity of his faith. I am not alone, he said, his words filled with conviction. I stand with the power of God, and He is greater than you. The miracle. In that moment, as Kofi's voice rang out, a brilliant light descended from the heavens. It was not like any light he had ever seen, pure, blinding, and filled with the weight of the divine. The light enveloped him, pushing back the waters that had surged around him. The river goddess shrieked, her form writhing as the light pressed against her, forcing her back into the depths of the water. The light grew brighter, stronger, until it filled the entire clearing, illuminating the river and the surrounding trees in a soft, holy glow. The goddess, her once powerful form now trembling, screamed in terror as the light consumed her. Her body began to distort and fade, her dark, swirling presence being driven away by the light of divine power. No, the goddess cried out, her voice filled with rage and fear. You cannot banish me. I am eternal. But it was too late. The light continued to grow, its brilliance filling the space where the goddess once stood. The river, once churning with dark, violent currents, began to settle. The waters receded, returning to their natural flow. The air grew still, and the storm of water that had threatened to consume Kofi faded into nothingness. Kofi stood in the center of the riverbank, his heart racing but his body unscathed. He could feel the presence of the divine all around him, a warm, peaceful energy that filled his being. The river goddess had been defeated, not by violence, but by the power of his faith and the divine intervention of the Creator. The waters of the river flowed once again, their once murky depths now clear and peaceful. The land around him, which had been dry and cracked, began to show signs of life. The crops that had withered began to stir, and the earth seemed to breathe once more. Kofi stood victorious, not because of his own strength, but because of the faith he had placed in God. He knew that the battle was not over, the goddess's defeat was just one step in a greater journey, but for now, he felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. As the sun set behind him, casting the sky in golden hues, Kofi raised his hands to the heavens and whispered a prayer of gratitude. He had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, knowing that his faith had won the battle. And so, with the river restored and his people saved, Kofi knew that his purpose had only just begun. The aftermath and the cost of power. Kofi's return. Kofi's journey back to the village was quiet, and the weight of the events he had just endured hung heavily on his heart. As he approached the village, he saw the once dry river flowing again, its waters clear and peaceful, rippling gently under the fading light of day. The land, which had been barren and cracked from the drought, now showed signs of life. Lush green shoots pushed through the soil, and the trees stood tall with their leaves shining in the sunlight. When the villagers saw Kofi approaching, a cheer erupted. People rushed to meet him, embracing him, their faces glowing with gratitude. They celebrated, their voices filled with joy as they praised Kofi for his bravery. The crops would grow again. Their homes, their families, would be safe. But as Kofi walked through the crowd, he felt no joy in the celebration. He couldn't bring himself to smile. His heart was heavy with the knowledge that his victory had come at a great cost. The river goddess had been defeated, but she had not been completely vanquished. Her curse still lingered, and the darkness she had unleashed had not been fully erased. Kofi could feel it, the pull of an unseen force, the quiet whisper of something waiting to reclaim what had been lost. The villagers were celebrating the restoration of the river, but Kofi knew that the goddess's power had not been fully broken. She would not rest until she had what was promised to her. He was her bargain, her debt to claim. That thought gnawed at him, making him feel like a pawn in a game much larger than he could comprehend. The burden of leadership. Days passed, and life in the village slowly returned to normal. The crops flourished, the river flowed, and the villagers began to rebuild their lives. Yet, despite the peace that had been restored, Kofi felt an increasing sense of isolation. The villagers looked to him as their leader, their prophet. People came from far and wide, seeking his help, asking him to heal the sick, to pray for their problems, to perform miracles. Kofi did as he was asked, offering his gifts freely, just as he always had. He healed the sick, helped the poor, and comforted those in need. But each act of kindness left him feeling more distant from the world he once knew. He was no longer just a boy. He was a symbol of power, a living connection between the earthly and the divine. The villagers called him the prophet, and his name spread beyond the borders of their small village. People from distant lands came to him, hoping for a miracle. But the more he helped, the more he felt the weight of his role crushing him. Kofi began to withdraw from his peers. The other children, once his playmates, now seemed so far away. They would watch him from a distance, whispering among themselves about his gifts, calling him the boy with the power. Some of them admired him, some were frightened by him. They no longer saw him as just Kofi. To them, he had become something greater, something unreachable. His childhood had been left behind in the shadow of his newfound responsibilities. Kofi longed for the simple days when he could laugh and run with his friends, when he could just be a child. But those days were gone. Now, he felt like a servant to the village, his life no longer his own. Each day, the burden of his gifts grew heavier. Each miracle he performed left him with less of himself. He had become a vessel, a conduit for the divine, but at what cost? Divine guidance. One evening, after a long day of helping the villagers, Kofi sat alone in the church, the soft glow of candles flickering around him. The village was quiet now, the sounds of celebration and joy fading into the stillness of the night. He had been praying, seeking some kind of peace, some kind of answer to the emptiness he felt inside. But no answer came. His mind was clouded with thoughts of the goddess, of the curse that still lingered over him. He wondered if he had made the right choice, if the battle he had fought had truly ended. Would the goddess return to claim what was promised? And what would become of him, the boy who had defied her? As he sat there, lost in thought, a soft voice broke through the silence. It was gentle, like the wind through the trees, but it carried a weight of authority. "Kofi," the voice called. Kofi looked up, startled. The room was empty. But the voice had come again, this time clearer, as if it were speaking directly to his heart. "Kofi, you are not alone." He closed his eyes, his heart racing as he listened. "You have struggled with the weight of your gifts," the voice continued. "But you are not meant to carry them alone. Your purpose is not just to heal and perform miracles for others, but to teach them, to show them the way to their own connection with the Creator, to help them understand that they, too, can find strength in faith." Kofi's breath caught in his throat. The voice was familiar, like the same presence that had spoken to him during his confrontation with the goddess. It was the voice of the Creator, guiding him. "You have been called, Kofi, to lead not just by your actions, but by your example. It is not enough to simply heal the sick and perform miracles. You must teach others how to find their own power, how to connect with the divine, and how to live in harmony with the earth and all its elements. You are a bridge, Kofi, not just between heaven and earth, but between people and the Creator." Kofi's heart swelled with understanding. The burden of his gift was not just a personal struggle, it was part of a greater plan, a greater mission. He was meant to teach, to guide, to help others find their own connection to the divine, so that they too could live in faith and harmony with the world around them. Tears filled Kofi's eyes as he knelt in prayer. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. The weight of his gift, the burden of leadership, was still heavy, but now he understood the purpose of it all. He was not meant to carry this burden alone. He was meant to share it with others, to help them grow and find their own strength. "I understand now," Kofi whispered. "I am not just a healer. I am a teacher." The voice spoke once more, its presence soothing and strong. "Go forth, Kofi. Teach the world. Share your gifts, but do not carry them alone. You are not just a prophet, but a guide. The work has only just begun." As the voice faded, Kofi felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle was not over, but he now knew how to face the challenges ahead. He would teach others, help them find their own connection to the Creator, and lead them with faith, not just as a healer, but as a teacher. With newfound clarity, Kofi rose to his feet. His journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt truly ready to embrace the path ahead. The cost of his power had been heavy, but the rewards, both for him and for those he would guide, would be worth it. The final choice. The river goddess returns. Years passed after Kofi's initial victory over the river goddess, and the village flourished. The land became fertile once more, and the people thrived under Kofi's guidance. As he had been taught, Kofi shared his gifts with others, helping them understand the power of faith and the Creator. His name spread far and wide as a prophet, a teacher, and a healer. But despite the peace that had settled over the village, Kofi's heart never truly rested. He knew the battle with the river goddess had not been final. Her curse had merely been delayed. One fateful day, the skies darkened unnaturally, casting a shadow over the land. The river, once peaceful, began to churn, its water swirling in violent torrents. A deep rumbling echoed through the village, shaking the earth beneath Kofi's feet. His heart sank as he realized that the river goddess had returned. This time, she was different. Her power was even greater than before, more corrupt and more terrifying. Her form had changed, now a monstrous creature made entirely of water and shadow, her eyes burning with the fury of an ancient spirit long scorned. She emerged from the river once again, her voice shaking the very air with its power. "Kofi," the goddess's voice thundered, "you think you have defeated me? You think your faith and your God can protect you forever? I am eternal, and you are mine." Kofi stood before her, his heart pounding, but his resolve unbroken. He knew the goddess had come to claim what had been promised, to take him once again and regain her power over the river. But now, she had a much greater threat in mind. "If you do not submit to me, Kofi," the goddess continued, her voice dripping with malice, "I will destroy everything you love. Your village. Your family. Everything will be swept away in the flood unless you bow before me once more." The goddess's power surged, sending violent waves crashing through the village. Houses crumbled, trees were uprooted, and the villagers screamed in terror as the floodwaters rose. Kofi felt the weight of his duty press down on him, his people, the land, his family, all were in danger. And the goddess, in her rage, would not stop until he gave in. Kofi's ultimate test. For the first time in years, Kofi stood before the river goddess, torn between the choices before him. The fear of losing everything was real, the destruction was already underway, and the power of the goddess seemed insurmountable. His gifts, his faith, all had been leading to this moment. He knew that the wrong choice could spell disaster not only for his family but for the entire village. The goddess had made her demand clear: either Kofi would give up his power and submit to her, or the devastation would continue, destroying everything he loved. His heart was heavy, torn between his love for his people and his unshakable belief that his power was not meant to serve the goddess, but the creator. In this moment, Kofi had to make the ultimate choice. If he chose to give in, his life would be bound to the river goddess forever, and she would regain control over the land. But if he chose to defy her, the consequences would be dire. His heart ached as he thought of the devastation, but deep within him, he knew that submitting to the goddess was not the answer. He had already chosen once, and he would not give up his faith now. Kofi closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made his decision. He knew what he had to do. He could not, in good conscience, allow himself to be controlled by any force, no matter how powerful. His gifts were not his own, they came from God, and he had promised to use them to serve his will. He stood tall and faced the goddess, his voice steady as he spoke. "I will not bow to you," Kofi declared. "You may try to destroy everything I love, but I stand with God, and his power is greater than yours. I will not be your servant. I will break this bond, and I will free my people from your grasp." The goddess roared in fury, her form writhing and twisting in the turbulent waters. Her power surged again, the floodwaters rising even higher, but Kofi remained unmoved. With every ounce of his being, he called upon the Creator. "God, I trust in you," Kofi cried. "I break this bond that was made in ignorance. I trust that your power is greater than any force in this world. In your name, I call upon your light to defeat the darkness that still seeks to control me." Kofi's faith. As Kofi's words echoed across the land, the skies above him began to glow. The floodwaters froze, the earth itself halting the goddess's wrath. A blinding light descended from the heavens, enveloping Kofi as he stood with unwavering faith. The river goddess, in her fury, tried to strike at Kofi, but the light repelled her, burning away her form piece by piece. "No," the goddess screamed, her voice a twisted screech as the light engulfed her. "I am eternal. You cannot stop me." But Kofi's faith never wavered. The light continued to grow brighter, casting away the darkness that had once consumed the land. The river goddess, unable to withstand the divine power, faded into nothingness, her form disintegrating like mist before the sun. Her influence was gone. The waters, once violent and threatening, now returned to their natural flow, calm and peaceful once again. Kofi fell to his knees, exhausted but filled with a deep sense of peace. The battle was over. The goddess was defeated. And his people were safe. The legacy. In the days that followed, the village slowly recovered from the destruction wrought by the goddess's final attempt to reclaim Kofi. The river, now peaceful and strong, provided once again, and the crops flourished. The villagers rebuilt their homes and their lives, forever grateful to Kofi for his bravery and unwavering faith. As Kofi grew older, he became a revered elder, known not only for his miraculous gifts but for the wisdom he had gained through years of struggle and sacrifice. His story spread across the land, a tale of defiance against darkness and the strength of faith in the face of overwhelming odds. People came from far and wide to hear his teachings, to learn how to live with faith, and to understand the power of the Creator that flowed through him. Kofi's legacy lived on, not just in the miracles he performed or the lessons he taught, but in the strength of the human spirit that he had come to embody. He had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not through his own strength, but through his unwavering belief in God. And so, the boy who had once been a healer became a teacher, a prophet, and a symbol of hope for generations to come. His story continued to inspire others to stand firm in their faith, to trust in God's power, and to believe in the strength that lies within each of us to overcome even the greatest of challenges.